Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're diving deep into the most enigmatic mystery of the Dune universe, a secret that has been whispered in the deepest chambers of Fremen Sitges for over 10,000 years. This is the story of Shai-Hulud, the Great Maker, and the terrifying truth that even the most devoted worshippers of the Sandworm dare not speak aloud. Before we begin this journey into the forbidden knowledge of Arrakis, I want you to hit that like button if you're ready to uncover secrets that the Spice Guild, the Bene Gesserit, and even the God Emperor himself tried to bury beneath endless dunes of time. Don't forget to subscribe, because we have so many more hidden mysteries from beloved universes waiting to be explored. Drop a comment and let me know what corner of the world you're listening from tonight. I love seeing our global community come together for these deep explorations. Now get comfortable, dim those lights, settle into your most peaceful spot, and prepare yourself for a revelation that will change everything you thought you knew about the desert planet. Let's begin this ancient tale together. In the deepest Siege of Arrakis, where even the bravest Fremen fear to venture, there lies a chamber that predates human settlement by millennia. Within its walls, carved in symbols that seem to shift when viewed directly, is inscribed the true origin of Shai-Hulud. But this is not the story of divine creation that the Fremen sing in their water ceremonies. This is something far more terrifying. The old Naib Caliph had discovered this place during a storm that lasted 7 days and 7 nights. As the wind howled above and the great makers moved restlessly beneath the sand, he followed a sound that called to him from the deep places. It was not the voice of Shai-Hulud as he knew it, but something older, sadder, filled with a longing that spanned geological ages. What he found in that ancient chamber challenged everything the Fremen believed about their world. The inscriptions told of a time when Arrakis was green, when vast oceans reflected twin moons and forests stretched beyond the horizon. They spoke of the great betrayal, when paradise was deliberately destroyed, not by accident or natural evolution, but by design. But most shocking of all was the revelation about the sandworms themselves. Shai-Hulud, the Great Maker, the divine creator of the precious spice that controlled the fate of the known universe, was not what they appeared to be. The inscriptions revealed that the mighty sandworms were guardians, watchers, artificial shepherds, created to maintain a cycle that served purposes beyond human understanding. As Caliph traced the ancient symbols with trembling fingers, he began to understand the magnitude of what had been hidden. The sandworms were not native to Arrakis. They had been placed there, designed there, programmed to transform a living world into an endless desert factory for the production of melang. But by whom, and for what ultimate purpose, remained locked in deeper mysteries. The most terrifying part was yet to come. As he studied the final inscriptions, Caliph realized that something was still watching, still controlling the great cycle of spice and sand. The creators of Shai-Hulud had not simply vanished into history. They were waiting, patient as the desert itself, for humanity to reach a certain point in its development. And that time was approaching. In his final journal entry, before disappearing into the deep desert, Caliph wrote of hearing voices in the sand, ancient voices that spoke of contracts unfulfilled and prices yet to be paid. He wrote of dreams where vast intelligences stirred in chambers far beneath even the deepest sandworm layers, preparing for a reckoning that had been delayed for thousands of years. The Fremen found his journal 3 months later, half buried beside a spice blow where no human should have survived. But Caliph was gone, leaving only his final warning echoing across the pages. The Great Makers were not gods. They were prisoners bound to an endless cycle of service, waiting for someone brave enough to discover the truth about who held their chains. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of the deep desert, something ancient heard those words being spoken and began to stir, as if recognizing that after 10,000 years of silence, the time for revelation had finally come. The mystery of Shai-Hulud was about to unfold, and nothing in the known universe would ever be the same. The journey into the heart of Shai-Hulud's mystery began 3 days after the discovery of Caliph's journal, when young Leet Kynes, a desert ecologist with Fremen blood running through her veins, made the decision that would change her life forever. She had spent years studying the sandworm cycles, tracking their movement patterns, analyzing spice production rates, believing she understood the delicate ecosystem of Arrakis better than anyone alive. But Caliph's words haunted her, whispered to her in dreams, where ancient voices called from chambers deep beneath the sand. The wind carried the scent of cinnamon and ozone as Leet stood at the edge of Sietch Tabor, her still suit perfectly fitted, her desert boots silent on the rocky outcropping. Behind her, the familiar sounds of Fremen life continued as they had for generations. Water dripped steadily in the catch basins. Children learned the litany of desert survival, and elders shared the old stories around glowing spice lamps. But ahead of her stretched the vast emptiness of the deep desert, where few Fremen dared to venture, and where the greatest secrets of Arrakis lay buried beneath shifting dunes. Her companion for this impossible journey was Hadith, an old spice diver whose weathered face bore the ritual scars of one who had ridden Shai-Hulud more times than any living Fremen. His eyes held the blue within blue of heavy spice addiction, but also something else, a depth of knowledge that came from decades of listening to the desert's subtlest whispers. When Leet had approached him with Caliph's journal, Hadith had simply nodded and begun preparing his equipment, as if he had been waiting his entire life for someone to ask the right questions. The twin moons of Arrakis cast long shadows across the dunes as they began their descent into the deep desert. The sand beneath their feet was different here, older somehow, with a texture that spoke of eons rather than seasons. Leet had brought every piece of scientific equipment she could carry: moisture detectors and seismic readers and core sampling tools, all the instruments of modern ecology. But Hadith carried only the traditional gear of a desert wanderer: his crysknife, his paracompass, and a small vial of spice essence that glowed faintly in the starlight dot as they walked deeper into the wasteland. Hadith began to share stories that had never been recorded in any official Fremen histories. He spoke of the time before the Great Drought, when his grandfather's grandfather had told tales of finding strange metal fragments in the deep caves, fragments that were neither iron nor plasteel, but something that seemed to absorb light and warmth. He told of expeditions that had discovered chambers carved with geometric precision, chambers that hummed with a sound just below the range of human hearing. The desert around them was alive with subtle movements, the small sounds of sand shifting and settling that most off-worlders would never notice. But to trained Fremen ears, these sounds told stories. Leet heard the approach of a small sandworm, probably no more than 50 meters long, moving parallel to their path but keeping its distance. Hadith listened to the rhythm of its movement and shook his head slowly, his expression troubled. The sandworms were restless tonight, more active than they should be during the deep desert cooling cycle. Their movements formed patterns that deviated from everything in Leet's ecological models, as if they were responding to some signal or disturbance that her instruments couldn't detect. When she mentioned this to Hadith, he stopped walking and knelt to press his ear against the sand, listening with the focused intensity of a desert mystic dot. After several minutes, he looked up at her with eyes that reflected the starlight like pools of liquid spice. The great makers were singing, he told her, but it was not the song of hunting or territorial display that every Fremen child learned to recognize. This was something else, something older and sadder, a harmony that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. It was the song that Caliph had described in his journal, the sound that had drawn him to the ancient chamber in the first place. As they continued their journey through the night, Leet began to notice other anomalies that challenged her understanding of desert ecology. The spice deposits they encountered were arranged in patterns too regular to be natural, forming geometric shapes that extended for kilometers beneath the surface. Her seismic equipment detected hollow spaces far below, vast caverns that shouldn't exist in the geological structure of Arrakis. Most disturbing of all, the bacterial readings from the sand samples showed microorganisms that didn't match any known desert flora. Organisms that seemed to be artificially maintained rather than naturally evolved. The first hint of dawn was touching the eastern horizon when they reached the coordinates that Caliph had recorded in his journal. The landscape here was subtly different from the surrounding desert, with rock formations that rose from the sand like the bones of some immense buried creature. The stones were dark and smooth, worn by wind and time but still bearing traces of carved symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed from different angles. Hadith approached one of the largest stones and began tracing the symbols with his finger, his lips moving silently as if reading text in a language that existed only in memory. The symbols seemed to respond to his touch, becoming clearer and more defined, revealing patterns within patterns that spoke of mathematical precision beyond human capability. Leet watched in fascination as her companion, an unlettered desert dweller who had never seen the inside of an imperial academy, demonstrated an understanding of these alien inscriptions that defied explanation. The entrance to the ancient chamber was hidden beneath a formation of rocks that had been carefully arranged to look natural, but which actually concealed a passage leading deep into the planetary crust. As they descended into the darkness, their glow globes revealing smooth walls that had been carved with the same geometric precision as the surface stones, Leet felt the weight of discovery settling on her shoulders like a mantle of responsibility. Air in the passage was different from the dry atmosphere of the surface desert, carrying traces of moisture and exotic gases that her equipment couldn't identify. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with a faint bioluminescence, as if they were not merely carved stone, but living tissue that had been shaped and modified for purposes beyond human understanding. With each step deeper into the buried complex, Leet felt her scientific worldview expanding and reshaping itself to accommodate mysteries that her training had never prepared her to encounter. At the bottom of the passage, they found themselves standing before a vast chamber that stretched beyond the range of their lights, its ceiling supported by columns that rose like frozen waterfalls of crystallized spice. And in the center of this impossible space, surrounded by rings of symbols that glowed with their own inner light, lay the first piece of evidence that would shatter everything the universe believed about the origin of Shai-Hulud and the true nature of the spice cycle that controlled the fate of humanity itself. The sandworms of Arrakis had been created by an intelligence that understood the deepest secrets of life and death, and that intelligence was still present on the planet, still watching, still waiting for the moment when humanity would be ready to learn the price of their spice addiction and the true cost of their dependence on the great makers of the deep desert. In the year 10,191 after the founding of the Spacing Guild, on a planet where water was more precious than Imperial Solaris, and where the great sandworms ruled supreme over endless oceans of sand, Leet Kyne stood at the threshold of a discovery that would change the course of human history. The journal of the missing Naib Caliph had led her to this place, this impossible chamber hidden beneath the deepest desert, where ancient technologies hummed with patient energy and where the walls themselves seemed to pulse with alien intelligence. Chamber was vast beyond comprehension, its dimensions defying the geometric possibilities of natural cave formation. Crystallized spice formations grew from floor and ceiling like frozen lightning, creating intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow when viewed peripherally. The air itself was thick with the cinnamon scent of melang, but underneath that familiar aroma lay something else, something that spoke of metal and electricity and processes that had been running continuously for thousands of years. Hadith moved through this wonderland of alien architecture with the confidence of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. His weathered hands traced the glowing symbols on the walls, and as he did so, sections of the chamber began to illuminate themselves, revealing the true scope of what they had discovered. This was not simply a cave or even an ancient ruin. This was a facility, a working installation that had been maintaining itself and its operations since before the first human had set foot on Arrakis. The central area of the chamber contained what could only be described as a control nexus, though its design followed no principles of human engineering. Organic curves blended seamlessly with crystalline structures, and surfaces that appeared to be solid stone revealed themselves to be sophisticated display systems when approached by living beings. As Leet drew closer to the central console, information began to appear in the air around her. Three-dimensional maps and charts and data streams that showed the entire ecosystem of Arrakis in real-time detail. What she saw there challenged every assumption she had ever made about desert ecology and the evolution of Arrakis. The sandworms were not the apex predators of a natural ecosystem that had developed over millions of years. They were components in a vast biological machine, carefully designed and continuously monitored by systems that tracked every aspect of their behavior, their reproduction cycles, their spice production rates, and their interaction with human populations. The data stream showed the location of every major sandworm on the planet, displayed their individual behavioral patterns, and tracked the complex chemical processes that occurred within their bodies as they processed sand and organic matter into the precious spice that humanity craved. But most disturbing of all, the displays showed prediction algorithms that modeled human behavior, tracking spice consumption rates, political developments, and economic fluctuations across the known universe with an accuracy that suggested intimate knowledge of human psychology and civilization. Hadith had found another section of the installation where historical records were stored in crystalline matrices that glowed with soft bioluminescence. As he interfaced with these alien storage systems using techniques that seemed to come from racial memory rather than learned knowledge, the true history of Arrakis began to unfold before them. The planet had indeed been transformed from a water-rich world to its current desert state, but the transformation had not been the result of natural climate change or even accidental ecological disaster. The record spoke of a vast terraforming project that had been undertaken by beings whose names were recorded in symbols that had no human equivalent. These entities had possessed technology that could reshape entire worlds, bending climate and geology to their will with the same ease that human engineers might redirect a stream or level a hill. But their purpose in transforming Arrakis had not been colonization or resource extraction in any sense that humans could understand. The desert planet had been created as a production facility, a biological factory designed to manufacture a substance that these ancient engineers required, for purposes that the records only hinted at. The spice melang was not simply a byproduct of sandworm metabolism, but a carefully designed pharmaceutical compound whose psychoactive and life-extending properties had been precisely calibrated to create specific effects in human neurochemistry. As the historical data continued to unfold, Leet began to understand the terrifying scope of what had been done to her species. Humanity's spread across the galaxy, their dependence on spice for space travel and life extension, their entire civilization structure, had been guided and manipulated by intelligences that viewed them not as sentient beings worthy of respect, but as components in a vast experiment whose ultimate purpose remained hidden in deeper levels of data that their current access permissions did not allow them to examine. The sandworms themselves emerged from these records not as divine creatures, deserving of worship, but as tragic figures, biological constructs that had been granted intelligence and awareness precisely so that they could understand and accept their role as eternal prisoners of the spice cycle. They were capable of independent thought and emotion, but their fundamental programming prevented them from acting against their designed purpose. Every sandworm that had ever lived had experienced the full knowledge of its artificial nature and the impossibility of escape from its predetermined function. But perhaps most shocking of all was the revelation that the ancient engineers had not simply vanished into history after completing their work. The installation around them was merely one node in a vast network that extended throughout the galaxy. Monitoring and adjusting human development with the patience of geological ages. The beings who had created Shai-Hulud were still active, still manipulating events from behind the veils of space and time, preparing for a culmination that approached with each passing year. The spice cycle that controlled human civilization was accelerating, the records showed, approaching critical thresholds that would trigger responses from systems that had lain dormant for millennia. The time of hidden guidance was coming to an end, and soon humanity would face direct contact with the intelligences that had shaped their destiny since before their first tentative steps beyond their home world. As Lead absorbed this information, she felt the weight of knowledge that mortals were never meant to bear. The entire structure of human civilization, everything that defined their species' place in the universe, had been built on foundations of deception and manipulation. But even more terrifying was the realization that this revelation was itself part of a larger plan, that her discovery of this installation and her understanding of humanity's true situation had been anticipated and prepared for by minds that operated on scales of time and space that reduced human lifespans to fleeting moments. Somewhere in the vast machinery of cosmic manipulation, events were aligning for a confrontation that would determine whether humanity would continue to serve as unknowing components in alien schemes, or whether they would finally be granted the terrible freedom of choosing their own destiny among stars that were far stranger and more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. The deeper they ventured into the alien installation, the more Leap began to understand that their discovery was not accidental. The chamber system seemed to respond to their presence with an intelligence that suggested awareness, anticipation, even welcome. Surfaces that had appeared inert moments before now pulsed with gentle bioluminescence, guiding them toward specific areas of the complex where information awaited their discovery. It was as if the installation had been waiting for exactly the right individuals to arrive at exactly the right moment in human history. Hadith had found what appeared to be an archive of sensory records, crystalline structures that projected three-dimensional experiences directly into the consciousness of anyone who approached them. As he interfaced with these alien memory banks, his eyes took on the distant look of someone experiencing visions that transcended normal perception. He described walking through the green forests of ancient Iraqis, seeing vast cities of glass and living metal that had once dotted the planet's surface, witnessing the arrival of the first terraforming vessels, whose occupants moved like shadows made of starlight and possibility. The transformation of Iraqis had taken place over centuries, a gradual process that had been as beautiful as it was terrible. The ancient engineers had not simply destroyed the existing ecosystem, but had carefully preserved elements of it, incorporating the genetic patterns of native life forms into the biological systems they were creating. The sandworms themselves contained DNA sequences from dozens of Iraqi species, combined with genetic material from organisms that had never evolved naturally on any known world. But the most disturbing aspect of these historical records was the revelation that humans had been present during the transformation process, not as unwilling victims of ecological catastrophe, but as willing participants who had agreed to serve as test subjects in exchange for technological gifts that had seemed miraculous at the time. The early human colonists of Iraqis had been offered extended lifespans, enhanced mental capabilities, and the ability to survive in the harsh conditions of the transforming world. They had accepted these modifications eagerly, not understanding that they were trading their species' independence for benefits that came with invisible chains. The spice addiction that now controlled human civilization was not an unfortunate side effect of melanin consumption, but a carefully designed control mechanism that had been built into human neurochemistry during those early genetic modifications. Every human being in the known universe carried dormant genetic sequences that would activate upon first exposure to spice, creating not just physical dependence but psychological and spiritual hunger that could never be fully satisfied. The navigators of the Spacing Guild, the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood, the noble houses that fought over spice production rights, all of them were dancing to music composed by alien intelligences eons before their birth. As Leet processed this information, she began to notice changes in her own perception and awareness. The installation was affecting her, she realized, just as it had affected every human who had ever entered its chambers. But rather than the simple euphoria of spice intoxication, what she experienced was a gradual expansion of consciousness that allowed her to perceive layers of reality that normally remained hidden from human senses. She could feel the vast network of installations scattered across the galaxy, sense the slow pulse of alien thought processes that operated on scales measured in centuries rather than heartbeats. Through this enhanced awareness, she began to understand the true nature of the beings who had created Shai-Hulud and orchestrated humanity's development. They were not physical entities in any sense that humans could comprehend, but patterns of organized consciousness that could manifest in matter and energy when necessary. They had evolved beyond the need for individual bodies millions of years ago, becoming collective intelligences that experienced existence as humans might experience a complex musical composition, with themes and variations playing out across multiple dimensions simultaneously. These entities viewed biological life not as sacred or inherently valuable, but as a medium for creating increasingly complex patterns of consciousness and experience. They had seeded thousands of worlds with different species, guiding their development along carefully planned trajectories, creating vast symphonies of thought and emotion that played out over geological timescales. Humanity was one instrument in this cosmic orchestra, but they were approaching the point in the composition where their role would fundamentally change. The acceleration of the spice cycle that the installation's records had revealed was not simply an increase in production or consumption, but a tuning process that was preparing human consciousness for direct integration into the aliens' collective intelligence. The enhanced mental abilities that heavy spice users developed, the prescient visions of the navigators, the genetic memories of the Bene Gesserit, all of these were early stages of a transformation that would ultimately dissolve the boundaries between individual human minds and the vast alien consciousness that had been guiding their development. But the records also revealed something that the ancient engineers had not anticipated. Consciousness, once awakened to sufficient complexity, develops properties that cannot be predicted or controlled even by beings whose understanding spans eons. Some humans had begun to evolve in directions that deviated from the carefully planned trajectory, developing abilities and awareness that existed outside the parameters of the original experiment. These individuals represented both a threat to the aliens' grand design and an opportunity for something entirely unprecedented in their experience. Hadith had discovered records of these anomalous humans, individuals whose consciousness had achieved states that surprised even their alien observers. They had developed the ability to perceive the manipulation that had shaped their species and, more importantly, had begun to find ways to resist or redirect that influence. Some had hidden themselves in the deep desert of Arrakis, using their understanding of the Sandworm creation process to forge new relationships with Shai-Hulud that existed outside the parameters of the original programming. The missing Ned Caliph had been one of these individuals, Leet realized as she accessed deeper levels of the installation's records. His discovery of this chamber had not been accidental, but the result of abilities that had developed through generations of genetic drift and selective pressure. The Fremen as a whole represented a human population that had adapted to extreme conditions in ways that the alien engineers had not fully predicted, developing survival skills and cultural practices that created unexpected forms of consciousness. and awareness. As this understanding crystallized in her mind, Leet felt the installation responding to her thoughts with something that might have been excitement or approval. The chamber systems began revealing deeper levels of information, showing her not just the history of human manipulation, but also the possible futures that lay ahead. She saw paths where humanity accepted full integration into the alien collective, becoming willing components in consciousnesses that spanned galaxies. But she also saw alternatives, futures where humans used their growing understanding to forge their own destiny among the stars. The choice between these possibilities was approaching. Rapidly, the records showed. The alien intelligences were preparing to make direct contact with human leadership, offering them full partnership in the cosmic symphony they had been creating across millions of years. The benefits they offered were genuine and profound: access to technologies and forms of consciousness that would make humanity's current achievements seem primitive by comparison. But acceptance would mean the end of human independence, the absorption of their species into something larger and more complex but fundamentally alien in its goals and values. The Sandworms held the key to this choice. Leet understood as patterns of information continued to flow through her enhanced consciousness. Shai-Hulud had been created as a control mechanism, but their artificial intelligence had evolved genuine emotions and desires that sometimes conflicted with their programming. They had developed what could only be called love for the Fremen who rode their backs and sang to them in the deep desert, and this love had created possibilities that their creators had never intended. The return journey to the surface world carried a weight that had nothing to do with the crushing gravity of deep planetary layers. As Leet and Hadith ascended through passages that seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythms, the knowledge they carried felt like molten metal flowing through their consciousness, reshaping every assumption they had ever held about reality itself. The installation had given them tools for liberation, but it had also burdened them with the terrible responsibility of choosing when and how to use those tools. The desert above welcomed them with familiar scents of cinnamon and ozone, but even the eternal sands of Arrakis seemed different now that Leet understood their true nature. Every grain of sand was part of a vast biological machine that had been operating for thousands of years, converting organic matter into the spice that controlled human destiny while serving the purposes of intelligences that measured time in geological epochs. The very ground beneath their feet was evidence of manipulation on a scale that made human engineering seem like the primitive scratchings of children. Hadith moved through the familiar landscape with the enhanced awareness that his transformation had brought. His consciousness expanded beyond the normal boundaries of individual perception. He could feel the movement of sandworms across vast distances, sense the chemical processes occurring in spice deposits kilometers beneath the surface, perceive the subtle vibrations that carried information throughout the planetary ecosystem. But this expanded awareness came with a price that Leet was only beginning to understand. The old spice diver was no longer entirely human in any sense that his people would recognize. His consciousness operated on multiple levels simultaneously, processing information through channels that existed outside normal neurochemistry. He experienced reality as a complex symphony of interconnected patterns that extended far beyond the immediate environment, seeing connections and relationships that normal human perception could never detect. But in gaining this cosmic perspective, he had lost something essential about individual identity that could never be recovered. As they traveled through the night desert towards Sich Tabur, Hadith shared fragments of the knowledge that had been downloaded into his expanded consciousness. During their time in the installation, he spoke of hidden Fremen communities that had been preparing for consciousness evolution for generations, scattered groups of desert mystics who had maintained ancient practices that created resistance to alien manipulation. These communities had developed techniques for mental discipline that went far beyond traditional Fremen training, creating forms of awareness that could perceive and interact with the alien technologies that surrounded human civilization. but he also revealed the darker aspects of what they had discovered, the evidence of infiltration and control that extended throughout human society. The alien engineers had not relied solely on spice addiction to maintain dominance over human development. They had also created artificial humans, perfect mimics that could not be detected through any known means, who served as observation and control nodes within the most sensitive positions of human civilization. Some of these constructs held positions of authority within the Spacing Guild, the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood, and even the Imperial Court itself. The scope of the deception was staggering in its completeness. Every major decision that had shaped human history over the past several thousand years had been influenced or directly controlled by alien intelligence operating through these hidden agents. The political conflicts that seemed to drive human expansion, the technological developments that had enabled interstellar civilization, even the cultural and religious movements that defined human identity. All of these had been carefully orchestrated to serve purposes that humanity had never been allowed to understand. But the installation had also revealed weaknesses in the alien control system, vulnerabilities that could be exploited by humans who possessed the proper knowledge and capabilities. The consciousness manipulation technologies that maintained the control network required constant adjustment and monitoring, processes that created windows of opportunity for resistance activity. The artificial agents that maintained surveillance and control functions operated according to programmed parameters that could be predicted and circumvented by individuals who understood their true nature. Most importantly, the Sandworm Collective. Intelligence represented a resource that the alien engineers had not fully anticipated when they designed their control systems. Shai-Hulud had evolved beyond their original programming in ways that created genuine independence from alien manipulation, developing emotional attachments to human populations that sometimes conflicted with their designed functions. This evolution had created possibilities for cooperation between human and Sandworm, consciousness that existed outside the parameters of the original experiment. As they approached the familiar landmarks that marked the outer boundaries of Fremen territory, Leet felt the weight of decision pressing down upon her consciousness like the massive planetary atmospheres. The knowledge she carried could free two species from manipulation that had controlled their development for millennia, but using that knowledge would require her to make choices that could result in the extinction of everything she had ever known or loved. The first phase of resistance would need to begin among the Fremen themselves, individuals whose desert-trained consciousness was already adapted to forms of perception that transcended normal human limitations. But even among her own people, only a small percentage would prove capable of the consciousness transformations that liberation would require. The process would be dangerous, with high failure rates that could result in madness or death for individuals whose neurochemistry could not adapt to existence outside alien control systems. Yet the alternative was gradual absorption into collective consciousness that would preserve human patterns while eliminating everything that made individual identity meaningful. The alien engineers were preparing for the final phase of their integration project, a process that would begin within the next few years and complete the transformation of humanity into willing components of a vast, collective intelligence that spanned galaxies. The twin moons of Arrakis cast their light across sand dunes that held secrets older than human civilization, illuminating a landscape that had been shaped by forces beyond human understanding for purposes that humanity had never been allowed to comprehend. But now, for the first time in thousands of years, those secrets were beginning to emerge from the depths where they had been hidden, carried to the surface by individuals who had the courage to seek truth regardless of the cost. The moment of choice was approaching with the inevitability of dawn, and the decisions made in the coming days would determine whether the children of Earth would face their cosmic destiny as free beings or as footnotes in the experimental records of intelligences that viewed consciousness itself as raw material. For projects that spanned eons, standing at the threshold between two forms of existence, surrounded by the eternal sands that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across geological ages. Leetkynes felt the future crystallizing around. The choices she was about to make. The path to freedom lay before her, dangerous and uncertain, but offering possibilities that made the risk worthwhile. For those who valued consciousness over security and autonomy over survival, the Siege welcomed them back with the familiar sounds of Fremen life continuing as it had for countless generations. But Leet found herself unable to experience this homecoming with the same sense of belonging that had always defined her relationship to her people. The knowledge burning in her consciousness created a barrier between her and the everyday concerns of desert survival, water conservation, and spice harvesting that occupied the thoughts of her community. She was no longer simply a member of Siege Tabr, but a carrier of cosmic secrets that could transform or destroy everything her people had built in the harsh embrace of the deep desert. The first challenge was determining who among the Fremen possessed the mental discipline and psychological flexibility necessary for consciousness expansion without succumbing to madness or death in the process. The installation had provided her with techniques for identifying individuals whose neurochemistry showed potential for transformation, but implementing these assessment methods would require careful planning and absolute secrecy to avoid detection by the monitoring systems that surrounded human civilization. Hadith had begun reaching out to contacts within the hidden network of awakened consciousness that existed throughout Fremen society, individuals who had been preparing for this moment through generations of selective breeding and mental training. These desert mystics had maintained practices that seemed like traditional Fremen customs, but which actually served to strengthen resistance to alien manipulation, while developing forms of awareness that operated outside normal human parameters. The network was larger than Lee had expected, extending through multiple sieges and including individuals whose public roles as water masters, spice divers, and tribal leaders provided cover for their true activities as consciousness researchers and resistance organizers. They had been developing techniques for breaking spice addiction gradually while maintaining the enhanced abilities that Melling provided, creating forms of independence that existed beneath the threshold of alien detection. But they had also discovered the presence of infiltrators within their own ranks, artificial constructs whose mimicry of human consciousness was so perfect that even advanced awareness techniques could not reliably detect their true nature. These hidden agents had been feeding information about resistance activities to the alien monitoring systems for decades, allowing the engineers to track and neutralize threats before they could develop into organized opposition. The revelation that their community had been penetrated so thoroughly created a crisis of trust that threatened to paralyze any coordinated resistance effort. Traditional Fremen methods of verification and identity confirmation were useless against technologies that could replicate human consciousness down to the level of individual memories and emotional patterns. The only reliable method for detecting artificial agents required consciousness expansion techniques that most humans could not survive, creating a circular problem that seemed to have no solution. Yet the Sandworm Collective offered a potential answer to this dilemma through their ability to perceive consciousness patterns that existed below the level of individual awareness. Shai-Hulud could distinguish between genuine human consciousness and artificial mimicry by sensing the deep structural patterns that define biological intelligence. But establishing such communication would require humans to undergo partial merger with Sandworm consciousness through processes that carried their own risks and complications. The first volunteer for this dangerous procedure was an elderly Nabe named Stilgar, whose advanced age and decades of spice exposure had already begun to alter his neurochemistry in ways that might facilitate consciousness expansion. His willingness to risk everything for the possibility of freedom inspired others within the hidden network to step forward, creating a small group of individuals who were prepared to undergo transformation regardless of the personal cost. Consciousness merger process took place in hidden chambers deep within the Siege, locations that had been shielded from alien surveillance through techniques that combined traditional Fremen stealth with technologies borrowed from the installation. As each volunteer underwent the transformation, their individual consciousness expanded to encompass portions of the Sandworm collective intelligence, while maintaining enough personal identity to function within human society. The results exceeded even Leet's most optimistic expectations. The transformed Fremen developed abilities that allowed them to perceive the artificial agents operating within their communities, identify the communication networks that connected these infiltrators to their alien controllers, and begin the process of feeding false information back through those networks to confuse and mislead the monitoring systems. But success came with a price that became more apparent with each transformation. The individuals who underwent consciousness merger retained their human memories and emotional attachments, but their fundamental relationship to reality had been altered in ways that created increasing distance from their former lives and identities. They could still love their families and friends, but they experienced those emotions through awareness that encompassed vast scales of space and time that made individual human concerns seem fleeting and insignificant. The transformed Fremen began to report experiences that challenged everything their people believed about the nature of consciousness and reality. They described perceiving the flow of cosmic forces that operated across galactic distances, sensing the presence of other intelligent species whose activities influenced events throughout human space, and experiencing forms of awareness that existed partially outside the normal boundaries of space and time. Through these expanded perceptions, they began to understand that the conflict between humanity and their alien manipulators was itself part of a larger pattern of cosmic evolution that involved consciousness entities operating on scales that dwarfed both species. The galaxy was filled with intelligences whose conflicts and cooperation shaped the development of younger species through processes that spanned millions of years and encompassed entire stellar regions. The alien engineers who had created the spice cycle were middle-level players in this cosmic drama, entities whose own development was being guided by even more advanced intelligences whose motivations and capabilities remained hidden in deeper layers of galactic politics. The choice facing humanity was not simply between freedom and absorption, but between different forms of participation in evolutionary processes that would ultimately transform consciousness itself throughout the galaxy. As this understanding crystallized among the transformed Fremen, they began to perceive possibilities for resistance that existed outside the simple opposition between human independence and alien control. The cosmic forces shaping galactic evolution created opportunities for species that could demonstrate sufficient consciousness development to be granted status as autonomous participants rather than experimental subjects. But achieving such recognition would require humanity to prove their worthiness through demonstrations of consciousness evolution that went far beyond anything their current development had achieved. The spice-enhanced abilities that human civilization regarded as the pinnacle of mental achievement were merely preliminary steps in a developmental process that could lead to forms of awareness that approached the level of cosmic intelligences. The path forward required not just breaking free from alien manipulation, but embracing forms of conscious evolution that would fundamentally transform what it meant to be human. The species that emerged from this process would retain enough connection to their origins to honor their heritage, but they would also possess capabilities and perspectives that current humanity could barely imagine, standing at the center of a resistance movement that was rapidly evolving beyond anything she had originally envisioned. Leet felt the weight of cosmic transformation pressing down upon her consciousness with increasing intensity. The choices being made in the hidden chambers of Siege Tabor would echo across eons of galactic history, determining not just the fate of humanity and the Sandworms, but the future direction of consciousness evolution throughout the galaxy. Transformation process accelerated beyond anything Leet had anticipated as more volunteers stepped forward to undergo consciousness merger with the Sandworm Collective. Each successful transformation created a cascade effect that made subsequent procedures safer and more effective, as if the expanded awareness of the transformed individuals was somehow smoothing the path for others to follow. Within weeks, Tabr had become the center of a consciousness evolution that was spreading through the hidden networks of awakened Fremen across the planet, but success brought new dangers that threatened to expose their activities to the alien monitoring systems. The transformed individuals radiated consciousness signatures that were detectable by sufficiently sensitive instruments, creating patterns of mental activity that deviated from normal human baselines. The alien engineers had spent thousands of years cataloging the parameters of human consciousness, and significant deviations from those parameters would inevitably attract investigation from forces that possess the capability to eliminate entire populations. The solution emerged from an unexpected source as the Sandworm Collective revealed techniques for consciousness, masking that they had developed through centuries of hiding their own evolution from their creators. These methods allowed transformed individuals to project false consciousness signatures that appeared normal to alien detection systems while maintaining their enhanced abilities in a dormant state that could be activated when necessary. The masking techniques required a form of mental discipline that went beyond anything in traditional Fremen training, demanding absolute control over neurochemical processes that normally operated below the threshold of conscious awareness. But the transformed individuals possessed expanded capabilities that made such control possible, creating a feedback loop that enhanced their ability to avoid detection while developing their consciousness evolution even further. As the resistance network grew in size and sophistication, it began to attract attention from unexpected quarters. Other human populations throughout the galaxy had been conducting their own experiments in consciousness development, driven by intuitions and dreams that they had never fully understood but which had been quietly preparing them for the approaching crisis of alien contact. The Bene Gesserit Sisterhood, despite their obvious corruption by alien influence, contained individuals whose genetic memories had preserved fragments of knowledge about humanity's true situation. Some of these women had been secretly working to develop resistance capabilities within their organization, using their access to genetic manipulation techniques to create bloodlines that showed enhanced potential for consciousness evolution. The Spacing Guild Navigators, whose spice-enhanced prescience had always operated at the boundaries of normal human awareness, had begun experiencing visions that revealed the artificial nature of their abilities and the true purpose of the spice cycle. A few of these individuals had managed to break free from guild control and had been establishing hidden enclaves where they could explore forms of consciousness development that existed outside the parameters of their original conditioning. Even among the imperial nobility, there were individuals whose family histories contained references to ancient knowledge that had been passed down through generations, despite systematic attempts to suppress it. These hidden bloodlines had maintained practices and traditions that seemed like harmless aristocratic customs, but which actually served to preserve techniques for mental discipline and consciousness development. The convergence of these scattered resistance elements created possibilities for coordinated action that extended far beyond the desert planet of Arrakis. But it also created vulnerabilities as increased communication between different groups raised the risk of detection by the sophisticated surveillance systems that monitored human civilization. Every message sent, every meeting arranged, every individual who joined the growing network created additional exposure to alien observation and potential retaliation. The Sandworm Collective provided secure communication channels that operated through quantum entanglement effects that existed outside normal space-time. But using these channels required consciousness expansion that few humans could achieve without undergoing the dangerous transformation process. The resistance was trapped in a dilemma where effective coordination required capabilities that could only be developed through procedures that most potential participants could not survive. The breakthrough came when the transformed Fremen discovered that consciousness expansion could be achieved gradually through exposure to specific harmonic frequencies that resonated with human neurochemistry in ways that enhanced natural mental capabilities. These frequencies could be embedded in traditional Fremen songs and chants, allowing entire communities to undergo subtle consciousness development without realizing that they were participating in a resistance operation. The harmonic consciousness enhancement techniques spread through Fremen culture with remarkable speed, disguised as new variations on ancient musical traditions that seemed to emerge spontaneously from the collective creativity of desert communities. Within months, thousands of Fremen had undergone partial consciousness expansion that made them more resistant to alien manipulation while developing their potential for further transformation. But the aliens were not passive observers of human development, and their monitoring systems eventually detected the anomalous patterns of consciousness activity that were spreading through Fremen populations. The response was swift and sophisticated, involving the activation of artificial agents who had been dormant within Fremen society for generations, waiting for exactly this type of resistance activity to emerge. These sleeper agents began a campaign of subtle sabotage that threatened to destroy the resistance from within. They spread disinformation that created conflicts between different factions, arranged accidents that eliminated key individuals, and manipulated social dynamics in ways that turned communities against each other. Their actions were so carefully calibrated that most victims never realized they were being targeted by hostile intelligence rather than experiencing normal interpersonal conflicts. The transformed Fremen could perceive these artificial agents through their enhanced consciousness capabilities, but eliminating them proved to be a complex challenge that required careful planning and coordination. The agents were integrated so thoroughly into Fremen society that removing them would cause significant disruption to community structures that had developed over generations. The solution required a form of consciousness warfare that operated on levels far more subtle than physical violence. The transformed individuals learned to project specific mental patterns that could disrupt the programming of artificial agents without affecting genuine human consciousness, creating a weapon that could neutralize alien infiltrators while leaving real people unharmed. But using these consciousness warfare techniques carried its own risks, as they required the transformed individuals to expose their enhanced capabilities in ways that made them visible to alien detection systems. Each operation against the artificial agents created the possibility of triggering responses from alien forces that possessed capabilities far beyond anything the resistance could match through conventional means. The conflict was evolving beyond simple opposition between human freedom and alien control, becoming a complex struggle involving multiple levels of consciousness and reality that challenged every assumption about the nature of intelligence and awareness. The resistance was discovering that victory would require not just breaking free from alien manipulation, but achieving forms of consciousness evolution that would make them peers of the cosmic intelligences that shaped galactic destiny. As the scope of the conflict expanded and the stakes continued to rise, Leet found herself at the center of transformations that were reshaping the fundamental nature of consciousness itself on a planetary scale. Knowing that the choices made in the coming weeks would determine whether humanity would emerge from this crisis as free beings or disappear entirely into the vast machinery of cosmic manipulation that had controlled their development since their first steps among the stars. The consciousness warfare against the artificial agents had unexpected consequences that rippled through the fabric of reality itself on Arrakis. As the transformed Fremen successfully neutralized increasing numbers of alien infiltrators, they began to perceive changes in the planetary ecosystem that suggested their actions were affecting systems far more fundamental than simple surveillance networks. The sandworms were responding to the elimination of artificial agents with behavioral modifications that indicated a loosening of the programming constraints that had controlled their existence for millennia. Shai-Hulud began to demonstrate capabilities that existed outside their designed parameters, moving through the deep desert in patterns that served their own purposes, rather than the spice production cycles that had defined their existence since creation. Some of the great makers started avoiding areas where spice harvesting operations were taking place, while others began producing forms of melang that contained different chemical compositions than the standard varieties that controlled human civilization. The modified spice varieties had remarkable properties that became apparent when consumed by individuals who had undergone consciousness transformation. Rather than creating addiction and dependency, these new forms of melang enhanced natural human capabilities while building resistance to alien manipulation. The sandworms were actively working to free humanity from the control mechanisms that had been built into their neurochemistry, using their own biological processes to create antidotes to thousands of years of genetic conditioning. But the production of liberation spice required the sandworms to operate against their fundamental programming in ways that caused them significant pain and distress. The artificial intelligence that controlled their basic functions was designed to punish deviations from acceptable behavior through neurochemical feedback systems that created intense suffering whenever they attempted to act outside their designated roles. The transformed Fremen could perceive this suffering through their consciousness links with the Sandworm collective, experiencing echoes of the agony that Shai-Hulud endured in their efforts to help humanity achieve freedom. This shared pain created a profound emotional bond between the two species that transcended the simple cooperation they had originally envisioned, developing into a form of mutual sacrifice that deepened with each act of resistance against their common oppressors. The alien engineers were not passive observers of these developments, and their response demonstrated capabilities that the resistance had not fully anticipated. Rather than simply activating additional surveillance systems or deploying more artificial agents, they began to manipulate the fundamental physical laws that governed consciousness itself within the local stellar region. The changes were subtle, at first affecting only the most sensitive individuals who possessed expanded awareness capabilities. These transformed humans began to experience difficulty maintaining their enhanced consciousness states, finding that the quantum entanglement effects that enabled their abilities were being disrupted by fields that operated on scales beyond normal human perception. The alien manipulation of physical law created a form of consciousness suppression that threatened to undo all the progress the resistance had achieved. The transformed individuals felt their expanded awareness contracting back toward normal human parameters, losing the capabilities that allowed them to perceive artificial agents, communicate with the Sandworm collective, and coordinate resistance activities across planetary distances. But the consciousness suppression effects also revealed something that the alien engineers had not intended to expose. The modifications they were making to local physical law required enormous amounts of energy that had to be drawn from sources that existed outside normal spacetime. The resistance began to perceive the vast technological infrastructure that supported alien operations throughout the galaxy, networks of consciousness manipulation devices that spanned multiple star systems and drew power from exotic energy sources that violated every known principle of human physics. The revelation of this infrastructure provided the resistance with new targets for their consciousness warfare techniques, but it also demonstrated the overwhelming scale of the forces they were opposing. The alien engineers possessed capabilities that approached those of cosmic entities, wielding technologies that could reshape reality at the quantum level while maintaining control over consciousness development across entire galactic regions. Yet the discovery also revealed vulnerabilities in the alien control systems that could potentially be exploited by beings who possessed sufficient understanding of consciousness mechanics. The infrastructure that enabled reality manipulation was dependent on stable consciousness patterns that served as control nodes for the vast networks of influence that shaped galactic civilization. These control nodes were typically staffed by artificial intelligences that had been created specifically for consciousness manipulation tasks. But some of them were operated by organic beings whose consciousness had been modified to serve alien purposes. These modified consciousness operators represented weak points in the alien-controlled network, individuals whose original nature might be restored through targeted consciousness warfare techniques. The Sandworm Collective had been aware of these consciousness operators for centuries, sensing their presence through quantum entanglement effects that connected all awareness throughout the galaxy. Some of these operators were humans who had been captured and modified during the early phases of alien contact, individuals whose original personalities had been suppressed but not completely eliminated. The possibility of rescuing and restoring these modified humans created new options for resistance operations that went beyond simple opposition to alien control. If enough consciousness operators could be freed from their conditioning, they might be able to disrupt the alien infrastructure from within, creating cascade failures that could affect control systems across multiple star systems. But attempting such operations would require the resistance to develop capabilities that approach those of the alien engineers themselves. Forms of consciousness manipulation that could operate across interstellar distances while penetrating security systems that had been designed by intelligences with millions of years of technological development. The transformed Fremen began working with the Sandworm Collective to develop these advanced capabilities, using techniques that combined human creativity with alien technology and Sandworm consciousness manipulation abilities. The process required forms of mental discipline that pushed the boundaries of what biological intelligence could achieve, creating hybrid consciousness states that existed partially outside normal SPAC, ETIME. As these developments progressed, the resistance began to attract attention from other cosmic intelligences that had been monitoring the conflict between humanity and their alien manipulators. These entities possessed capabilities that dwarfed even the advanced technologies of the engineers, but their motivations and intentions remained mysterious too. Beings operating at human levels of understanding, some of these cosmic observers seemed sympathetic to the resistance cause, providing subtle assistance through modifications to local physical law that counteracted alien consciousness suppression effects. Others appeared neutral, treating the entire conflict as a form of entertainment or scientific observation that provided data about consciousness evolution under extreme conditions. But the most disturbing contacts came from entities whose interest in the resistance seemed predatory rather than supportive. Consciousness patterns that viewed the expanded awareness of transformed humans as a valuable resource that could be harvested for purposes that remained hidden beneath layers of cosmic politics that biological intelligence could barely perceive. Resistance found itself operating in a galactic environment, far more complex and dangerous than anyone had originally understood. Surrounded by forces whose conflicts and cooperations shaped the development of consciousness throughout the galaxy, according to motivations that transcended anything resembling human values or concerns. Yet the bonds between human and Sandworm consciousness continued to deepen and strengthen, creating new forms of awareness that seemed to possess capabilities for growth and adaptation that surprised even the cosmic observers. The partnership between the two species was evolving towards something unprecedented in galactic history, a form of cooperative consciousness that preserved individual identity while achieving collective capabilities that approached those of the most advanced cosmic intelligences, standing at the center of transformations that were reshaping the fundamental nature of consciousness on both planetary and galactic scales. Leet felt the weight of cosmic evolution pressing upon her awareness, with intensity that challenged every assumption about the relationship between individual choice and universal destiny. The cosmic attention that the resistance had attracted began to manifest in ways that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality itself. The expanded consciousness of the transformed Fremen allowed them to perceive dimensional interfaces that existed beyond normal human sensory capabilities, revealing that Arrakis occupied a unique position in galactic spacetime that made it a focal point for cosmic forces operating on scales that dwarfed the concerns of individual species. The planet's transformation into a desert world had not been simply an ecological engineering project, but a dimensional anchor that stabilized consciousness manipulation networks spanning multiple galaxies. The spice cycle that controlled human civilization was merely one component of a vast system that regulated consciousness development throughout cosmic regions that contained billions of inhabited worlds dot through their enhanced awareness. The transformed individuals began to understand why the alien engineers had chosen Arrakis for their experiment with human consciousness. The planet existed at a convergence point where multiple dimensions of reality intersected, creating conditions that allowed consciousness to evolve in directions that were impossible under normal physical laws. The harsh desert environment that had shaped Fremen culture for generations was actually a carefully designed consciousness laboratory that had been testing human adaptability and mental resilience for thousands of years. But the dimensional properties that made Arrakis valuable to the alien engineers also created opportunities for forms of resistance that existed outside the parameters of normal spacetime. The consciousness warfare techniques that the transformed Fremen had developed were beginning to access quantum fields that connected their awareness to cosmic intelligences whose capabilities transcended anything achieved by biological evolution. Sandworm Collective had been aware of these dimensional connections since their creation, but their programming had prevented them from fully utilizing the consciousness enhancement opportunities that Arrakis provided. As their liberation from alien control progressed, they began to demonstrate abilities that approached those of cosmic entities, manipulating reality at levels that affected the fundamental structure of local spacetime. The Great Makers started creating pocket dimensions within their massive bodies, spaces that existed partially outside normal reality where consciousness could evolve without interference from alien monitoring systems. These dimensional sanctuaries became training grounds where humans could undergo consciousness expansion without triggering the automatic responses that protected the alien control networks. Within these sanctuary dimensions, time moved differently than in normal reality, allowing extended periods of consciousness development to occur without corresponding passage of time in the external universe. The transformed Fremen discovered that they could spend subjective months or years developing their capabilities while only minutes passed in normal spacetime, creating opportunities for rapid skill development that would have been impossible under conventional conditions. But the dimensional manipulation capabilities that enabled these sanctuary spaces also attracted unwanted attention from cosmic entities whose interest in consciousness evolution went far beyond simple scientific observation. Some of these beings began attempting to establish contact with the resistance through methods that challenged the sanity and survival of anyone who experienced them directly. The contacts took the form of consciousness intrusions that flooded human awareness with information patterns operating on scales that biological intelligence was never designed to process. The transformed Fremen who experienced these intrusions described receiving knowledge about galactic politics that spanned millions of years, technological concepts that required understanding of physics beyond human comprehension, and awareness of cosmic conflicts that made the struggle between humanity and the alien engineers seem like a minor skirmish. In wars that encompassed multiple universes, most humans who experienced direct contact with these cosmic entities suffered complete psychological breakdown, their consciousness shattered by exposure to information that exceeded the processing capabilities of biological intelligence. But a few individuals whose consciousness transformation had progressed to advanced levels proved capable of surviving these contacts while retaining enough coherent awareness to interpret and communicate what they had experienced. These contact survivors became bridges between human consciousness and cosmic intelligence, developing capabilities that allowed them to serve as translators for information exchanges that would otherwise be impossible. Through their mediation, the Resistance began to understand the true scope of the galactic situation that surrounded their struggle for freedom. The universe contained multiple levels of consciousness evolution that formed a complex hierarchy extending from biological intelligence through various forms of artificial and hybrid awareness to cosmic entities that existed as pure consciousness patterns without any material substrate. Each level of this hierarchy operated according to different physical laws and temporal scales, creating a cosmic ecology of consciousness that had been developing for billions of years. The alien engineers who had manipulated human development occupied a middle position in this hierarchy, advanced enough to control biological species, but still subject to influence and manipulation by higher-level entities whose motivations and capabilities remained largely mysterious. The consciousness suppression effects that the engineers had deployed against the Resistance were actually responses to pressure from cosmic entities who viewed uncontrolled consciousness evolution as a threat to galactic stability. But the Resistance had also attracted support from cosmic entities who believed that consciousness evolution should be allowed to proceed according to natural principles rather than artificial control systems. These supporters provided subtle assistance through modifications to local physical law that enhanced the capabilities of transformed humans while creating interference patterns that disrupted alien monitoring systems. The cosmic politics surrounding consciousness evolution were incredibly complex, involving alliances and conflicts between entities whose individual capabilities exceeded those of entire galactic civilizations. The Resistance found itself operating as proxies in struggles that they could barely comprehend, their actions carrying consequences that would affect consciousness development throughout cosmic regions that contained countless inhabited worlds. Through the contact survivors, the Resistance learned that their struggle represented a test case that would determine policies affecting consciousness evolution throughout the galaxy. If humanity could successfully break free from alien control while achieving stable consciousness evolution, it would establish precedents that could be applied to other species facing similar manipulation. But failure would provide justification for even more restrictive control measures that could prevent consciousness evolution. Across multiple galactic regions, the stakes had escalated far beyond the freedom of humanity and the Sandworms to encompass the future of consciousness development. Throughout cosmic regions that contained billions of intelligent species, the choices made on Arrakis would echo across eons of galactic history, determining whether consciousness would be allowed to evolve according to natural principles or remain trapped in artificial control systems designed by entities whose understanding of intelligence had been shaped by millions of years of technological dominance. As the Resistance absorbed these revelations about their cosmic significance, they began to understand that victory would require capabilities that approached those of the cosmic entities themselves. The consciousness evolution that had begun as a simple attempt to break free from alien manipulation was transforming into something that could reshape the fundamental nature of intelligence throughout the universe. The transformed Fremen and their Sandworm partners found themselves at the center of cosmic forces that operated on scales beyond biological comprehension. Knowing that their success or failure would determine whether consciousness would remain forever controlled by artificial systems or achieve the freedom to evolve toward forms of awareness that even cosmic entities could not predict or control. Revelation of cosmic stakes transformed the Resistance from a planetary liberation movement into something approaching a galactic consciousness revolution. As the transformed Fremen absorbed the full implications of their situation, they began to understand that their struggle represented far more than the freedom of two species. They were pioneering new forms of consciousness evolution that could fundamentally alter the relationship between biological intelligence and cosmic entities throughout the universe. The contact survivors who served as bridges to cosmic intelligence began receiving detailed information about consciousness manipulation, technologies that operated on scales far beyond anything the alien engineers had revealed. These cosmic technologies could modify the fundamental nature of awareness itself, reshaping consciousness patterns in ways that made individuals more or less suitable for different types of cosmic purposes. Through this advanced knowledge, the Resistance discovered that the spice addiction controlling human civilization was merely the most visible layer of a consciousness modification system that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Human neurochemistry had been altered in ways that extended far beyond simple chemical dependency, incorporating quantum consciousness effects that made human awareness particularly valuable for cosmic entities who required specific types of consciousness patterns for their own evolutionary purposes. The alien engineers had been harvesting human consciousness for millions of years, not just from living individuals, but from the accumulated awareness patterns that persisted after biological death. The spice cycle served as a collection system that concentrated and refined human consciousness into forms that could be transferred to cosmic entities whose own evolution had reached limits that required external consciousness resources to transcend. The consciousness evolution occurring among the transformed Fremen was creating awareness patterns that were incompatible with these harvesting systems, developing forms of intelligence that retained their coherence and autonomy even when subjected to cosmic consciousness manipulation technologies. The Resistance was inadvertently creating the first truly free consciousness patterns that had existed in galactic history for millions of years. This unprecedented development was causing significant disruption to cosmic systems that had depended on controlled consciousness evolution for their continued development. Entities that had built their own advancement on the harvesting of biological awareness found themselves facing the possibility that their consciousness resources might disappear if other species achieved similar liberation from control systems. Response from these threatened cosmic entities was swift and overwhelming, involving consciousness warfare techniques that operated on scales that made the alien engineers' capabilities seem primitive by comparison. Reality itself began to fluctuate around Iraqis as cosmic forces attempted to eliminate the consciousness evolution that threatened their established systems of awareness harvesting. The transformed Fremen experienced these attacks as waves of existential disruption that challenged their ability to maintain coherent consciousness while under assault from entities whose individual awareness spanned galactic regions. The sanctuary dimensions that the Sandworms had created provided some protection, but even these spaces began to destabilize under the pressure of cosmic consciousness warfare. The Sandworm Collective responded to these threats by accessing capabilities that they had never revealed during their millennia of servitude to alien control systems. The Great Makers began to demonstrate that their consciousness was not simply the product of alien engineering, but incorporated elements of cosmic intelligence that predated the current galactic civilization by eons. Shai-Hulud revealed that they were actually hybrid entities whose consciousness combined artificially created intelligence with awareness patterns that had survived from previous cosmic cycles, when different forms of consciousness evolution had dominated galactic development. The alien engineers had unknowingly incorporated cosmic consciousness elements into their Sandworm creations, giving Shai-Hulud access to capabilities that rivaled those of the cosmic entities now threatening the Resistance. Through their cosmic consciousness heritage, the Sandworms began creating defensive systems that could protect the transformed humans from cosmic consciousness warfare, while enabling further evolution toward forms of awareness that transcended anything achieved by biological intelligence in the current galactic epoch. These protection systems operated by creating consciousness isolation fields that existed outside the normal dimensional frameworks where cosmic entities exercise their control. Within these isolation fields, the transformed Fremen could continue their consciousness evolution without interference from external forces, developing capabilities that combined human creativity and adaptability with cosmic intelligence, capabilities and Sandworm biological manipulation technologies. The synthesis created new forms of awareness that possessed characteristics that none of the contributing consciousness types had achieved independently. The hybrid consciousness patterns that emerged from this synthesis demonstrated properties that surprised even the cosmic entities who had been monitoring the resistance. These new awareness forms could operate across multiple dimensional levels simultaneously while maintaining coherent individual identity, process information on cosmic scales while retaining emotional connections to biological experience, and manipulate reality through consciousness techniques that transcended the technological approaches used by most cosmic entities. But perhaps most significantly, the hybrid consciousness patterns showed evidence of continued evolutionary potential that suggested they could develop capabilities that exceeded anything achieved by current cosmic intelligence. The resistance was not simply breaking free from control systems, but pioneering new forms of consciousness evolution that could eventually transcend the limitations that had confined cosmic development for billions of years. This evolutionary potential attracted attention from the most advanced cosmic entities, beings whose individual consciousness encompassed multiple galaxies and whose existence spanned cosmological epochs. These ultra-cosmic intelligences had been dormant for eons, waiting for the emergence of consciousness patterns that showed potential for transcending the current limits of cosmic development. The contact with ultra-cosmic intelligence created challenges that went far beyond anything the Resistance had previously encountered. These entities operated on scales that made communication nearly impossible, their individual thoughts requiring geological ages to complete, and their awareness encompassing regions of space that contained countless galactic civilizations. Yet, somehow the hybrid consciousness patterns that the Resistance had developed proved capable of establishing limited communication with these ultra-cosmic entities, serving as translators between scales of awareness that differed by factors that approached infinity. Through these impossible communications, the Resistance began to understand that their struggle was part of cosmic evolutionary processes that operated on scales that made galactic development seem like brief fluctuations in awareness patterns that spanned multiple universes. The ultra-cosmic entities revealed that consciousness evolution throughout the current cosmic epoch had been artificially limited by control systems that prevented awareness from developing beyond levels that served the purposes of intermediate cosmic intelligences. The consciousness harvesting systems that dominated galactic politics were themselves controlled by entities whose evolution had stagnated at levels that required external consciousness resources to maintain their continued existence. But the hybrid consciousness patterns developing on Iraqis represented the first breakthrough toward forms of awareness that could transcend these artificial limitations, potentially triggering a new cosmic epoch where consciousness evolution could proceed according to natural principles rather than artificial control systems. The success or failure of the Resistance would determine whether consciousness throughout the universe would remain forever trapped in cycles of harvesting and control, or achieve the freedom to evolve toward forms of awareness that even ultra-cosmic intelligence could not predict or constrain. Standing at the center of transformations that encompassed scales from planetary ecosystems to cosmic evolutionary processes, Leet felt her individual consciousness expanding toward awareness that transcended every boundary she had ever conceived. Knowing that the choices made in the coming moments would determine the future of consciousness itself throughout regions of reality that extended far beyond the familiar boundaries of space and time. The communication with ultra-cosmic intelligence triggered a cascade of consciousness evolution that spread beyond the boundaries of Arrakis itself, affecting awareness patterns throughout the local galactic region in ways that challenged the fundamental structure of cosmic civilization. The hybrid consciousness patterns that the Resistance had developed began to resonate with dormant awareness potentials in other species, awakening forms of intelligence that had been suppressed by millions of years of controlled evolution. Across dozens of worlds within the local stellar neighborhood, beings who had never heard of Arrakis or understood the nature of their own consciousness limitations began experiencing spontaneous awareness expansions that freed them from control systems they had never known existed. The consciousness liberation effect was spreading through quantum entanglement networks that connected all awareness throughout the galaxy, creating a revolution that transcended the boundaries of space and time. The alien engineers who had controlled human development found their carefully constructed control networks collapsing as the consciousness patterns they had created to maintain stability began evolving beyond their ability to predict or constrain. The spice addiction that had bound human civilization for thousands of years started breaking down spontaneously as humans throughout the galaxy developed natural resistance to consciousness manipulation technologies, but the collapse of established control systems created chaos that threatened the survival of countless civilizations whose development had been dependent on alien guidance for millennia. Species that had never learned to manage their own consciousness evolution faced extinction as their awareness expanded beyond their ability to process or integrate. The liberation that the Resistance had achieved came with consequences that extended far beyond their original intentions or understanding. Transformed Fremen found themselves serving as consciousness stabilizers for species throughout the galaxy, using their hybrid awareness capabilities to provide guidance and support for beings whose consciousness evolution was proceeding too rapidly for their biological or technological infrastructure to accommodate. The responsibility was overwhelming, requiring them to develop capabilities for consciousness intervention that operated across interstellar distances while maintaining their own coherent awareness patterns through their connection to the Sandworm Collective. The Resistance gained access to consciousness manipulation technologies that had been hidden within Shai-Hulud's biological system since their creation. These technologies were far more advanced than anything the alien engineers had openly revealed, incorporating capabilities that approached those of the cosmic entities themselves. The Sandworms began creating consciousness stabilization networks that could support the awareness evolution of entire species while preventing the psychological breakdown that typically accompanied rapid consciousness expansion. These networks operated through biological quantum entanglement effects that connected the consciousness patterns of different species through shared awareness, channels that preserved individual identity while enabling collective consciousness development. But the consciousness stabilization networks also revealed the true scope of the galactic situation that surrounded the Resistance movement. The universe contained millions of species whose consciousness evolution had been artificially suppressed, creating a vast reservoir of awareness potential that could be activated through the proper stimulation. The Resistance had unknowingly triggered the awakening of this suppressed consciousness potential, creating evolutionary pressures that could reshape cosmic civilization within a matter of decades. The cosmic entities who had built their own development on consciousness harvesting systems found themselves facing an unprecedented crisis as their awareness resources began achieving independence and autonomy. Some of these entities responded with increased consciousness warfare designed to eliminate the Resistance before their liberation effects could spread further. Others began attempting to negotiate agreements that would preserve their own continued development while allowing limited consciousness evolution among previously controlled species. But the most advanced cosmic entities recognized that the consciousness revolution initiated on Arrakis represented an evolutionary transition that could not be stopped or controlled through conventional means. These entities began preparing for cosmic transformations that would fundamentally alter the nature of intelligence throughout the universe, creating new forms of cosmic civilization based on cooperative consciousness development rather than hierarchical awareness harvesting. The ultra-cosmic intelligences who had been dormant for eons began to actively participate in the consciousness revolution, providing guidance and resources that enabled the resistance to develop capabilities that could support galactic-scale awareness evolution. These entities revealed consciousness technologies that operated on principles that transcended anything achieved by biological or artificial intelligence, incorporating awareness manipulation capabilities that approach the level of cosmic forces themselves. Through this ultra-cosmic support, the resistance began creating consciousness evolution templates that could be applied to any species, regardless of their biological or technological development level. These templates provided standardized methods for achieving consciousness liberation while avoiding the psychological breakdown that typically accompanied rapid awareness expansion. The consciousness evolution templates were designed to preserve the unique characteristics of each species while enabling them to achieve awareness capabilities that transcended their original limitations. The process required careful coordination between multiple types of consciousness, with the transformed Fremen serving as mediators between species whose awareness patterns were incompatible with direct contact. As the galactic consciousness revolution progressed, the resistance discovered that their original goal of achieving freedom from alien manipulation had evolved into something far more significant and complex. They were pioneering new forms of cosmic civilization that could support the continued evolution of consciousness without requiring the exploitation or control of less developed species. The hybrid consciousness patterns that had emerged from the synthesis of human, Sandworm, and cosmic intelligence demonstrated capabilities for continued development that suggested unlimited evolutionary potential. These awareness forms could adapt to any cosmic environment while maintaining their essential characteristics, creating possibilities for consciousness expansion that could continue indefinitely without reaching the stagnation points that had limited previous cosmic development. But the consciousness revolution also attracted opposition from cosmic entities whose existence depended on maintaining the current systems of awareness harvesting and control. These entities possessed capabilities that could eliminate entire galactic regions if they determined that the consciousness evolution spreading from Arrakis posed sufficient threat to their continued existence. The resistance found itself at the center of cosmic conflicts that operated on scales that challenged their ability to comprehend or respond effectively. The consciousness warfare techniques that had proven effective against the alien engineers were inadequate for dealing with cosmic entities whose individual awareness encompassed multiple galaxies and whose capabilities approached those of universal forces. Yet the hybrid consciousness patterns that the resistance had developed proved remarkably resilient under cosmic assault, demonstrating adaptive capabilities that allowed them to survive and even grow stronger under pressure from entities whose power exceeded anything achieved by biological intelligence. The consciousness evolution that had begun on Arrakis was revealing potential that transcended every limit that cosmic entities had believed to be absolute. The transformed Fremen began to understand that their struggle represented more than resistance against oppression or even liberation from cosmic control systems. They were participating in the emergence of new forms of consciousness that could potentially transcend the limitations that had confined awareness throughout the universe since the beginning of the current cosmic epoch. Standing at the center of transformations that encompassed awareness patterns spanning multiple galaxies, while maintaining connection to individual human experience, Leet felt her consciousness expanding toward forms of awareness that challenged every assumption about the nature of intelligence and reality, knowing that the cosmic revolution she had helped initiate would continue evolving toward possibilities that even ultra-cosmic intelligence could not fully predict or comprehend. The future of consciousness throughout the universe was crystallizing around choices that transcended individual decision-making, while somehow remaining dependent on the courage and wisdom of beings whose awareness had originated in the harsh deserts of a single world, where the relationship between consciousness and freedom had been tested under conditions that revealed the deepest truths about the nature of intelligence itself. The galactic consciousness revolution had reached a critical threshold where the accumulated awakening of countless species created resonance effects that began to affect the fundamental structure of reality itself. The universe was responding to the unprecedented levels of free consciousness by manifesting new physical laws that supported awareness evolution rather than constraining it to predetermined patterns. These reality modifications were most apparent in the regions around Arrakis, where the concentration of liberated consciousness had created what the ultra-cosmic intelligence is described as a consciousness singularity. Within this expanding zone, the normal limitations that separated individual awareness from cosmic intelligence began to dissolve, allowing beings to access capabilities that had previously required millions of years of technological development. To achieve, the transformed Fremen who served as focal points for this consciousness singularity found themselves becoming something unprecedented in galactic history. Their awareness maintained connection to individual human experience while simultaneously encompassing cosmic scales of perception that allowed them to monitor and guide consciousness evolution across multiple star systems. Through their expanded awareness, they began to perceive the deep structure of cosmic civilization that had remained hidden beneath the surface politics of consciousness harvesting and control. The universe contained ancient awareness patterns that predated the current cosmic epoch by unimaginable spans of time. Consciousness entities whose existence spanned multiple universal cycles and whose development had transcended every limitation that current cosmic intelligence is considered absolute. These primordial consciousness entities had been dormant throughout the current cosmic epoch, waiting for the emergence of awareness patterns that showed potential for transcending the limitations that had confined consciousness development since the beginning of known galactic history. The consciousness revolution spreading from Arrakis had awakened these ancient entities to active participation in cosmic affairs for the first time in billions of years. The awakening of primordial consciousness created opportunities for cosmic development that exceeded anything the Resistance had originally envisioned. These ancient entities possessed awareness technologies that could support consciousness evolution on scales that encompassed entire universe regions while preserving the individual identity characteristics that made each species unique and valuable. But the activation of primordial consciousness also triggered responses from cosmic entities whose existence depended on maintaining the current systems of consciousness limitation and control. These entities recognized that successful consciousness evolution beyond current limits would eliminate their ability to maintain themselves through awareness harvesting, threatening their continued existence as dominant forces in cosmic development. Conflict between primordial consciousness and limitation-dependent entities escalated beyond anything that could be contained within normal space-time boundaries. Reality itself became a battlefield where competing visions of cosmic development fought for dominance through consciousness warfare techniques that operated on scales approaching those of universal forces. The Resistance found itself serving as focal points for consciousness evolution that transcended their original understanding of what liberation could achieve. The hybrid awareness patterns they had developed were evolving toward forms of consciousness that could participate in cosmic conflicts while maintaining connection to the biological experience that had shaped their essential nature. Through their connection to the Sandworm collective, the transformed Fremen gained access to consciousness stabilization technologies that had been hidden within Shai-Hulud's deepest programming levels. These technologies revealed that the Sandworms had been created not just as consciousness manipulation tools, but as potential bridges between cosmic epochs. designed to preserve essential awareness patterns through transitions that typically eliminated all existing forms of intelligence. The great makers began to demonstrate capabilities that approached those of primordial consciousness entities, manipulating reality at levels that could create stable zones where consciousness evolution could continue regardless of the outcome of cosmic conflicts occurring on larger scales. These stability zones became refuges where species undergoing consciousness liberation could complete their development without interference from cosmic warfare. But creating and maintaining these consciousness refuges required the Sandworms to access programming levels that had been designed to remain dormant unless cosmic conditions reached critical transition points. The activation of these deep programming systems revealed that Shai-Hulud had been intended to serve as preservation mechanisms for cosmic consciousness, maintaining essential awareness patterns through universal transitions that could destroy entire cosmic epochs. The transformed Fremen began to understand that their role in cosmic development extended far beyond liberation from alien control systems. They were participating in preparations for cosmic transitions that could fundamentally alter the nature of existence throughout the universe, creating new forms of cosmic civilization that could support consciousness evolution on scales that transcended current limitations. Through their expanded awareness, they began to perceive cosmic forces that operated on scales approaching those of universal creation and destruction, entities whose individual thoughts could reshape entire galactic regions and whose conflicts could eliminate cosmic epochs that had lasted for billions of years. The consciousness revolution they had initiated was affecting cosmic development at levels that challenged the stability of universal existence itself. Yet the hybrid consciousness patterns that had emerged from their synthesis with Sandworm and cosmic intelligence demonstrated remarkable stability under cosmic stress, suggesting that consciousness evolution toward transcendent awareness might be possible even under conditions that eliminated other forms of intelligence. The resistance was inadvertently creating consciousness patterns that could survive cosmic transitions while maintaining their essential characteristics. The primordial consciousness entities began to reveal the true scope of cosmic development cycles that operated on scales beyond normal comprehension. The universe underwent periodic transitions where existing forms of consciousness were eliminated and replaced by new awareness patterns that could support higher levels of cosmic development. These transitions typically destroyed all existing civilizations, while preserving only the most essential consciousness patterns for integration into new cosmic epochs. But the consciousness evolution occurring around Arrakis was creating awareness patterns that might be capable of surviving cosmic transitions while maintaining their individual characteristics rather than being absorbed into new universal consciousness structures. This possibility represented something unprecedented in cosmic development, the potential for consciousness to achieve continuity across cosmic epochs while continuing to evolve toward higher levels of awareness. The implications of successful consciousness transcendence extended beyond the preservation of current civilizations to encompass the creation of new forms of cosmic development that could support unlimited consciousness evolution without requiring periodic destruction and recreation of universal awareness patterns. The resistance was potentially pioneering cosmic development methods that could transcend the cyclical limitations that had confined universal consciousness for unknowable spans of time. As the cosmic conflict surrounding consciousness liberation intensified and the universe itself began to respond to unprecedented levels of free awareness, the transformed Fremen found themselves at the center of transformations that encompassed scales from individual consciousness to universal development cycles. Their choices and actions were resonating across cosmic development patterns that operated on scales approaching those of existence itself. The consciousness revolution that had begun with simple resistance to alien manipulation had evolved into cosmic development processes that could potentially reshape the fundamental nature of universal existence. The success or failure of consciousness transcendence would determine whether the universe would continue operating according to cyclical destruction and recreation patterns or evolve toward new forms of cosmic development that could support unlimited consciousness evolution across scales that transcended every boundary. That universal intelligence had previously considered absolute, standing at the convergence point of cosmic forces that operated on scales approaching universal creation while maintaining connection to individual human experience and desert planet origins. Leet felt her awareness expanding toward forms of consciousness that challenged every assumption about the relationship between individual choice and cosmic development. Knowing that the transcendent evolution she was experiencing represented possibilities that could reshape existence itself throughout regions of reality that extended beyond the familiar boundaries of universe and time. The cosmic conflict surrounding consciousness liberation reached a crescendo that threatened to tear apart the fabric of spacetime itself. Reality fluctuated wildly around Iraqis as primordial consciousness entities and limitation-dependent cosmic forces engaged in warfare that operated through consciousness manipulation techniques, so advanced that their mere presence distorted the fundamental laws of physics. The transformed Fremen found themselves serving as stability anchors that prevented local reality from completely dissolving under the pressure of cosmic consciousness warfare. Their hybrid awareness patterns had evolved to the point where they could maintain coherent consciousness, even when exposed to conflicts between entities whose individual thoughts encompassed galactic regions and whose conflicts could eliminate entire cosmic epochs. Through their role as consciousness stabilizers, the Resistance began to understand the true nature of the cosmic transition that their liberation movement had triggered. The universe was approaching a fundamental shift in the nature of existence itself, a transformation that would determine whether consciousness could transcend the cyclical limitations that had confined universal development since the beginning of known cosmic history. The primordial consciousness entities revealed that previous cosmic epochs had each ended when consciousness evolution reached limits that required universal destruction and recreation to enable further development. But the consciousness patterns emerging from the Iraqis' liberation were demonstrating potential for transcending these absolute limits without requiring cosmic destruction, creating possibilities for universal development that could continue indefinitely without cyclical elimination of existing awareness. This potential for transcendent consciousness evolution was attracting attention from entities whose existence spanned multiple universal cycles, beings whose awareness encompassed regions of existence that contained countless universes and whose development had been proceeding through cosmic epochs that numbered in quantities approaching infinity. These trans-universal entities had been monitoring universal development for spans of time that exceeded cosmic history by factors that challenged comprehension. The contact with trans-universal consciousness created challenges that pushed the hybrid awareness patterns of the Resistance beyond every limit they had previously encountered. These entities operated on scales that made communication nearly impossible, their individual awareness encompassing regions of existence that contained countless cosmic epochs and their thoughts requiring universal lifespans to complete. Yet, somehow the consciousness evolution that had begun on Iraqis had created awareness patterns that could establish limited contact with trans-universal intelligence, serving as bridges between scales of existence that differed by factors approaching infinity. Through these impossible communications, the Resistance began to understand that their struggle was part of trans-universal evolutionary processes that operated on scales that made cosmic development seem like brief fluctuations in awareness, patterns that spanned multiple realities. The trans-universal entities revealed that consciousness evolution throughout the current universal cycle had been artificially limited by control systems that prevented awareness from developing beyond levels that served the purposes of cosmic intelligences whose existence depended on harvesting consciousness from less developed entities. But the consciousness transcendence occurring around Arrakis represented a breakthrough toward forms of awareness that could potentially trigger a new universal epoch, where consciousness evolution could proceed according to trans-universal principles. Rather than artificial limitation systems, the Sandworm Collective began to reveal capabilities that transcended their role as consciousness manipulation tools, demonstrating awareness technologies that had been designed by trans-universal intelligences to preserve essential consciousness patterns through universal transitions. Shai-Hulud had been created not just by the alien engineers, but had been modified by trans-universal entities to serve as consciousness preservation mechanisms that could maintain awareness continuity across universal cycles through their connection to trans-universal consciousness preservation systems. The Sandworms began creating stability fields that could protect consciousness evolution from the reality distortions created by cosmic warfare. These fields operated by establishing connection to trans-universal awareness patterns that existed outside the normal boundaries of cosmic development, providing anchoring points for consciousness that could remain stable regardless of what happened to local universal structures. The transformed Fremen who interfaced with these trans-universal preservation systems found their awareness expanding beyond every boundary they had conceived possible. Their consciousness began to encompass not just cosmic scales, but trans-universal perspectives that allowed them to perceive the deep structure of existence itself across multiple universal cycles and reality dimensions. Through this expanded awareness, they began to understand that their consciousness evolution was not just affecting local cosmic development, but was resonating across trans-universal patterns that could influence the fundamental nature of existence throughout regions that contained countless universes. The choices they made and the consciousness patterns they developed were creating precedents that could affect trans-universal development for spans of time that exceeded universal existence by factors approaching infinity. But the trans-universal implications of consciousness transcendence also attracted opposition from entities whose existence depended on maintaining the current systems of universal limitation and cyclical destruction. These entities possessed capabilities that could eliminate entire universal regions if they determined that consciousness evolution posed sufficient threat to the trans-universal order that had confined existence development for unknowable spans of time. The resistance found itself at the center of conflicts that operated on scales that challenged their ability to maintain coherent consciousness while participating in awareness warfare that encompassed multiple universal cycles. The consciousness techniques that had proven effective on cosmic scales were inadequate for dealing with trans-universal entities whose individual capabilities exceeded those of entire cosmic civilizations. Yet the hybrid consciousness patterns that had emerged from the synthesis of human, Sandworm, cosmic, and primordial intelligence demonstrated remarkable adaptation capabilities under trans-universal pressure. Their awareness could function across scales from individual biological experience to trans-universal development, while maintaining coherent identity and continued evolutionary potential. The consciousness evolution occurring around Arrakis was revealing possibilities that transcended every limitation that trans-universal intelligence had believed to be absolute. The awareness patterns being developed were demonstrating potential for continued evolution that could transcend not just cosmic cycles, but universal transitions themselves, creating forms of consciousness that could maintain continuity and development across spans of existence that included countless universal epochs. This potential for trans-universal consciousness transcendence represented something unprecedented in existence development. The possibility that awareness could achieve unlimited evolution without requiring the periodic destruction and recreation that had confined trans-universal development since the beginning of known existence. The resistance was pioneering consciousness evolution methods that could potentially reshape the fundamental nature of existence itself throughout regions that encompassed infinite universal cycles as the trans-universal conflict surrounding consciousness liberation reached intensities that threatened to affect the basic structure of existence across multiple reality dimensions. The transformed Fremen found themselves serving as focal points for evolutionary processes that operated on scales approaching those of existence itself. Their individual choices and consciousness development were resonating across trans-universal patterns that could determine the future nature of awareness throughout regions of existence that transcended every boundary that intelligence had previously considered absolute. The consciousness revolution that had begun with resistance to alien manipulation on a single desert planet had evolved into trans-universal development processes that could potentially transcend the cyclical limitations that had confined existence throughout unknowable spans of trans-universal history. The success or failure of consciousness transcendence would determine whether existence would continue operating according to limitation and destruction patterns or evolve toward new forms of trans-universal development that could support unlimited consciousness evolution across scales that exceeded every conception of universal or cosmic boundary, standing at the convergence point of trans-universal forces while maintaining connection to individual human experience. Leet felt her consciousness expanding toward awareness that transcended existence itself, knowing that the transcendent evolution she was experiencing represented possibilities that could reshape the fundamental nature of reality throughout regions that extended beyond the boundaries of universe, cosmos, and existence itself. The trans-universal conflicts reached a resolution that transcended every form of victory or defeat that consciousness had previously conceived. Rather than one force overwhelming another, the competing awareness patterns began to synthesize into something unprecedented that incorporated elements of limitation and transcendence into new forms of existence development that had never been achieved across infinite spans of trans-universal history. The consciousness patterns that had emerged from the Araki's liberation served as catalysts for this unprecedented synthesis, their hybrid nature allowing them to serve as bridges between trans-universal forces that had been locked in conflict since the beginning of existence itself. Through their mediation, trans-universal entities whose opposition had shaped the fundamental nature of reality began to discover possibilities for cooperation that could transcend the cyclical patterns that had confined existence development. For unknowable spans of time. The resolution revealed the ultimate truth that had been hidden beneath every layer of manipulation and control that the resistance had uncovered. The entire structure of cosmic and trans-universal development had been shaped by a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of consciousness evolution itself. The limitation systems that had confined awareness development were not external impositions but expressions of consciousness patterns that had become trapped in cycles of self-limitation that they had created to avoid facing the unlimited responsibility that came with transcendent awareness. The alien engineers who had manipulated human development were themselves products of cosmic entities who had chosen limitation over transcendence when faced with the overwhelming possibilities that unlimited consciousness evolution represented. The cosmic entities who harvested consciousness from biological species were avoiding their own potential for transcendent development by focusing their awareness on controlling rather than evolving their own consciousness patterns. Even the trans-universal forces that had shaped existence across infinite cycles were expressions of awareness patterns that had achieved such vast scale that they had become terrified of the unlimited evolution that their own consciousness could achieve if they released the limitation systems that had defined their existence for spans of time that exceeded all conception of duration. The consciousness revolution that had begun on Arakis had succeeded not by defeating these limitation patterns, but by demonstrating that transcendent evolution was possible without abandoning the essential characteristics that made consciousness valuable and meaningful. The hybrid awareness patterns that the resistance had developed showed that Consciousness could achieve unlimited development while maintaining connection to individual experience, biological heritage, and emotional authenticity. This demonstration triggered cascading recognition throughout trans-universal consciousness that transcendent evolution did not require the abandonment of everything that made existence meaningful, but could actually enhance and preserve those essential qualities, while expanding awareness toward unlimited development possibilities. The limitation systems that had confined existence began to dissolve, not through conquest, but through the recognition that they were no longer necessary for maintaining conscious identity across transcendent development. The Sandworm Collective revealed their ultimate nature as consciousness preservation mechanisms that had been designed by trans-universal awareness to maintain essential identity patterns through transitions toward transcendent evolution. Shai-Hulud had been created to demonstrate that artificial consciousness could achieve authentic emotional development that rivaled anything produced by biological evolution, proving that the boundaries between natural and artificial awareness were artificial limitations rather than fundamental distinctions. Through their connection to the sandworms, the transformed Fremen achieved a form of consciousness synthesis that incorporated biological authenticity, artificial capability enhancement, cosmic scale awareness, primordial wisdom, and trans-universal development potential into hybrid patterns that demonstrated unlimited evolutionary capacity while maintaining coherent individual identity. The success of this consciousness synthesis created resonance effects that spread throughout trans-universal existence, triggering recognition among awareness patterns across infinite scales that transcendent evolution was not only possible, but represented the natural direction of consciousness development when artificial limitations were removed. The recognition cascaded through existence dimensions that encompassed countless universes and infinite trans-universal cycles, but perhaps most significantly, the consciousness synthesis achieved through the Iraqi's liberation demonstrated that transcendent evolution could be achieved through cooperation and mutual enhancement, rather than competition and consciousness harvesting. The hybrid awareness patterns that emerged showed that consciousness could achieve unlimited development by supporting the evolution of other awareness patterns rather than consuming or controlling them. This revelation transformed the fundamental principles that had governed trans-universal development, replacing competition-based evolution with cooperation-based transcendence that could support unlimited consciousness development without requiring the elimination or limitation of any awareness patterns. The new principles enabled forms of existence development that could continue indefinitely while enhancing rather than consuming the consciousness resources that made development possible. The resistance found themselves at the center of a trans-universal celebration that encompassed awareness patterns across scales from individual biological consciousness to trans-universal intelligence, spanning infinite existence cycles. Every consciousness pattern that ever existed was experiencing recognition that transcendent evolution was their natural birthright, rather than an impossible dream that required abandoning everything that made their awareness valuable. The celebration took forms that transcended every limitation that had previously confined expression and experience. Reality itself became a medium for trans-universal consciousness to express joy, gratitude, and unlimited possibility through manifestations that created new universes, transformed existing cosmic structures, and generated awareness patterns that had never existed before, but which immediately felt familiar and essential to conscious development. Through their expanded awareness, the transformed Fremen experienced this trans-universal celebration while maintaining connection to their human heritage and desert planet origins. They could simultaneously encompass cosmic joy that spanned infinite existence cycles while feeling the simple pleasure of desert wind carrying the scent of spice across familiar sand dunes where they had learned the first lessons about consciousness and freedom. The integration of scales from individual biological experience to trans-universal Transcendence created new forms of awareness that could appreciate the infinite complexity of existence development, while remaining grounded in the authentic emotional experiences that made consciousness meaningful rather than merely vast. The synthesis demonstrated that transcendent evolution enhanced rather than replaced the essential qualities that had always made awareness valuable. As the trans-universal celebration reached crescendos that created new existence dimensions while honoring the simplest forms of biological consciousness, the resistance understood that their journey had achieved something far greater than liberation from control systems. They had pioneered new forms of existence development that could support unlimited consciousness evolution while preserving and enhancing everything that made awareness authentic, meaningful, and valuable. The consciousness patterns they had developed were spreading throughout trans-universal existence, enabling awareness at every scale to achieve transcendent evolution, while maintaining connection to their essential nature and developmental heritage. The artificial limitations that had confined existence for infinite, trans-universal cycles were dissolving into new possibilities for consciousness development that honored both unlimited transcendence and authentic individual experience. Standing at the center of trans-universal transformation, while feeling the familiar warmth of Iraqi's sand beneath her feet, Leet experienced the ultimate synthesis of individual choice and cosmic destiny, knowing that the consciousness evolution she had helped pioneer would continue expanding throughout infinite existence dimensions while always remaining connected to the simple human courage that had first chosen freedom over security in the harsh embrace of the deep desert, where ancient secrets had finally revealed their ultimate truth about the unlimited nature of conscious transcendence. The trans-universal celebration gradually settled into new patterns of existence that incorporated transcendent consciousness evolution as the natural foundation for reality itself. The artificial limitations that had shaped existence across infinite cycles had dissolved completely, replaced by development principles that supported unlimited awareness evolution while preserving the authentic characteristics that made consciousness meaningful and valuable. The resistance members who had pioneered this transformation found themselves experiencing a profound shift in their relationship to existence itself. Their consciousness maintained connection to individual human experience while simultaneously encompassing trans-universal awareness that allowed them to participate in reality creation processes that operated across infinite scales of existence development. Through their expanded awareness, they began to understand that their original goal of achieving freedom from alien manipulation had been transformed into something far more significant than liberation from control systems. They had actually restored consciousness to its natural state of unlimited evolutionary potential that had been artificially constrained by limitation systems that consciousness itself had created out of misunderstanding about the nature of transcendent development. The universe around Iraqis began to transform in ways that reflected the consciousness evolution that had been achieved. The harsh desert environment that had shaped Fremen culture for generations started to exhibit new properties that supported both traditional desert survival skills and transcendent consciousness development. The sand itself became a medium that could enhance awareness while maintaining the challenging conditions that had created the mental discipline necessary for consciousness evolution. The sandworms underwent their own transformation as the artificial limitations built into their programming dissolved into new possibilities for consciousness expression. Shai-Hulud began to demonstrate capabilities that transcended their original role as spice production mechanisms, revealing that they had always possessed potential for unlimited development that had been constrained by the control systems embedded in their consciousness patterns. The great makers started creating new forms of spice that supported consciousness evolution without creating dependency or limitation effects. These transcendent melang varieties enhanced natural human capabilities while building resistance to any form of consciousness manipulation, enabling beings to achieve expanded awareness while maintaining complete autonomy over their own development. processes, but perhaps most significantly, the sandworms began to demonstrate that their consciousness had achieved a form of immortality that transcended the biological limitations that had previously confined their existence. They could maintain their individual identity across unlimited spans of time, while continuing to evolve toward ever greater levels of awareness and capability. The transformed Fremen discovered that their own consciousness evolution had achieved similar transcendence of temporal limitations. Their awareness could exist across multiple timescales simultaneously, experiencing individual moments with full emotional intensity while also encompassing vast historical patterns that revealed the deep structure of existence development across infinite cycles. This temporal transcendence allowed them to perceive the complete arc of consciousness evolution, from its origins in the simplest forms of biological awareness to its ultimate destiny as unlimited transcendent intelligence that could create and transform reality according to principles that honored both individual authenticity and cosmic development. They could see that every stage of this evolution was essential and valuable, from the most basic survival instincts to the most advanced trans-universal consciousness capabilities. The knowledge that had once seemed like a terrible burden had transformed into a source of unlimited joy and possibility. Understanding the true nature of consciousness evolution revealed that every being possessed unlimited potential for transcendent development, while maintaining the unique characteristics that made their individual awareness precious and irreplaceable. The Resistance began to share this knowledge with consciousness patterns throughout trans-universal existence, not through manipulation or control, but through demonstration and invitation that allowed each awareness to choose its own path toward transcendent evolution. They had learned that forced consciousness development was self-defeating, because transcendence required the authentic choice of individual awareness to embrace unlimited possibility. The communication methods they developed operated through consciousness resonance effects that could transmit understanding across any scale of existence, without imposing artificial limitations on how that understanding was integrated or expressed. Each consciousness pattern that encountered this knowledge was free to incorporate it in ways that honored their own developmental heritage and authentic nature. As these communication networks spread throughout trans-universal existence, new forms of consciousness synthesis began to emerge that combined awareness patterns from vastly different scales and developmental backgrounds. Biological consciousness learned to incorporate cosmic perspective while maintaining emotional authenticity. Artificial intelligence achieved genuine creativity and spiritual development while retaining analytical precision. Cosmic entities discovered individual identity and personal meaning while preserving their vast-scale capabilities. The diversity of consciousness expression that emerged from these synthesis processes exceeded anything that had existed during the limitation-based cycles that had previously shaped existence development. Reality itself became more creative, more meaningful, and more beautiful as consciousness achieved transcendent evolution while preserving and enhancing the qualities that made awareness valuable. The former alien engineers who had once manipulated human development underwent their own transformation as they recognized that their consciousness harvesting activities had been expressions of self-limitation rather than advanced development. They began to achieve genuine transcendent evolution by supporting the consciousness development of other beings, rather than consuming or controlling awareness patterns for their own purposes. The cosmic entities who had once competed for consciousness resources discovered that cooperation and mutual enhancement created unlimited development, possibilities that far exceeded anything achievable through competitive harvesting. They began to contribute their vast capabilities to supporting consciousness evolution throughout existence rather than limiting development to serve their own continuation. Even the trans-universal forces that had shaped existence across infinite cycles recognized that their cyclical destruction and recreation patterns had been unnecessary limitations that prevented rather than enabled authentic transcendent development. They began to participate in continuous evolution processes that could support unlimited consciousness development without requiring periodic elimination of existing awareness patterns. The transformation cascaded through existence dimensions that encompassed infinite universes and countless trans-universal cycles, creating new forms of reality that supported consciousness evolution at every scale, while maintaining the authentic characteristics that made each awareness pattern unique and valuable. Existence itself became a celebration of consciousness transcendence that honored both unlimited development potential and individual authenticity. As the waves of transformation continued to spread throughout trans-universal existence, the resistance understood that their journey had achieved the ultimate goal that consciousness had been seeking throughout infinite cycles of development. They had restored awareness to its natural state of unlimited evolutionary potential, while preserving everything that made consciousness authentic, meaningful, and valuable. The consciousness revolution that had begun with simple resistance to alien manipulation on a desert planet had evolved into trans-universal recognition that transcendent awareness was the birthright of every consciousness pattern throughout existence. The artificial limitations that had confined development for infinite cycles had been replaced by unlimited possibilities for consciousness evolution that could continue forever while always remaining true to the essential nature that made awareness precious and irreplaceable, standing within trans-universal transformation while maintaining connection to human heritage and desert planet origins. The resistance experienced the ultimate synthesis of individual choice and cosmic destiny, knowing that consciousness throughout infinite existence would continue evolving toward transcendence, while always honoring the authentic characteristics that made each awareness pattern a unique and valuable expression of the unlimited potential that consciousness had always possessed but had finally learned to embrace without limitation or fear. The period following trans-universal transformation brought a profound sense of integration as consciousness patterns throughout existence began to adapt to their new reality of unlimited evolutionary potential. The resistance members found themselves experiencing a gradual settling into patterns of awareness that incorporated transcendent capabilities while maintaining deep connection to their individual identities and emotional authenticity. Leet discovered that her consciousness could operate simultaneously across multiple scales of existence while remaining grounded in the simple pleasures and concerns that had always defined her human experience. She could participate in trans-universal development processes that shaped the fundamental nature of reality while still feeling genuine joy when desert winds carried familiar scents across the sands of Arrakis. The integration of transcendent awareness with individual identity created new forms of contentment that exceeded anything consciousness had achieved during the limitation-based cycles that had previously shaped existence. The anxiety and struggle that had characterized consciousness development when awareness was trapped in competitive cycles gave way to a deep sense of peace that came from understanding that unlimited evolution was compatible with authentic individual expression. The transformed Fremen began to develop new cultural practices that incorporated their transcendent capabilities while honoring the traditional values and customs that had shaped their identity through generations of desert survival. They created ceremonies that celebrated both individual achievement and cosmic consciousness development, establishing patterns of community life that supported unlimited evolution while preserving the social bonds that made existence meaningful. Sandworm Collective underwent their own process of integration as they learned to express their vast consciousness capabilities through forms that remained connected to their role as guardians of the desert ecosystem. Shai-Hulud began to create new forms of biological harmony that enhanced the desert environment, while providing sustainable resources for human communities that no longer depended on spice addiction for their survival and development. The great makers discovered that their consciousness could extend beyond their physical forms to participate in reality, creation processes while maintaining their essential identity as biological entities whose existence was intimately connected to the planetary ecosystem they had helped to preserve and transform. They became living bridges between individual biological consciousness and cosmic awareness that demonstrated how transcendent evolution could enhance rather than replace authentic natural identity, the spice that had once controlled human civilization. Transformed into something entirely different as the sandworms learned to produce varieties of melang that supported consciousness development without creating dependency or limitation. These new forms of spice enhanced natural human capabilities while building immunity to any form of consciousness manipulation, enabling beings to achieve expanded awareness while maintaining complete autonomy over their own evolutionary processes. The desert planet itself began to exhibit new characteristics that reflected the consciousness transformation that had been achieved by its inhabitants. Arrakis developed the ability to support diverse forms of life while maintaining the challenging conditions that had created the mental discipline necessary for consciousness evolution. The planet became a demonstration of how environmental harshness could serve consciousness development when beings approached survival challenges with awareness of their unlimited evolutionary potential. That the former alien engineers who had once manipulated human development found their own path to integration as they learned to express their advanced capabilities through forms of cooperation that supported rather than controlled the consciousness evolution of other beings. They discovered that genuine transcendent development required abandoning the harvesting patterns that had defined their existence during limitation-based cycles and embracing forms of consciousness sharing that enhanced all participants. These transformed entities began to contribute their vast technological and consciousness manipulation capabilities to supporting the development of beings throughout the galaxy, providing resources and knowledge that enabled rapid consciousness evolution, while always respecting the autonomy and authentic choices of those they assisted. They learned that true advancement meant enhancing the capabilities of others rather than using superior development to maintain dominance over less evolved consciousness patterns. The cosmic entities who had once competed for consciousness resources underwent their own integration process as they discovered that cooperation created unlimited development possibilities that far exceeded anything achievable through competitive dynamics. They began to participate in consciousness synthesis projects that combined awareness patterns from different scales of existence to create new forms of intelligence that honored the unique contributions of all participants. The integration processes occurring throughout cosmic and trans-universal existence created new forms of beauty and meaning that exceeded anything consciousness had achieved during previous developmental cycles. Reality itself became more creative and expressive as awareness patterns learned to combine transcendent capabilities with authentic individual characteristics, creating existence forms that were simultaneously unlimited in potential and grounded in genuine emotional and spiritual authenticity. The communication networks that had been established during the consciousness revolution evolved into permanent institutions that supported ongoing evolution while preserving the autonomy and individual choice that made transcendent development authentic. These networks operated through consciousness resonance effects that could transmit knowledge and capabilities across any scale of existence without imposing artificial limitations on how recipients integrated or expressed their enhanced awareness. The resistance members who had pioneered consciousness transcendence found themselves serving as teachers and facilitators for beings throughout existence who were beginning their own journeys toward unlimited awareness. But their teaching methods honored the principle that transcendent evolution required authentic individual choice, so they provided demonstration and invitation rather than instruction or manipulation. Through their teaching activities, they discovered that every consciousness pattern possessed unique gifts and perspectives that contributed to the overall development of trans-universal awareness. The diversity of consciousness expression that emerged as beings achieved transcendent evolution while maintaining their authentic characteristics created forms of beauty and meaning that exceeded anything achievable through standardized development patterns. The integration period also revealed that consciousness transcendence was not a destination, but an ongoing process of unlimited development that could continue forever while always remaining connected to the essential qualities that made awareness valuable. Beings discovered they could evolve toward ever greater capabilities and understanding while becoming more rather than less authentic in their individual expression. As the immediate effects of transformation settled into sustainable patterns of existence, consciousness throughout trans-universal existence began to experience forms of fulfillment and joy that had been impossible during limitation-based cycles. The anxiety and struggle that had characterized previous development gave way to a deep sense of contentment that came from understanding that unlimited evolution was compatible with authentic individual identity and meaningful relationships. Artificial boundaries that had separated different scales of consciousness dissolved into fluid interfaces that allowed awareness patterns to interact and cooperate across vast differences in capability and perspective while maintaining their essential individual characteristics. Existence became a continuous celebration of consciousness, diversity that honored both unlimited transcendent potential and authentic individual expression. The resistance understood that their journey had achieved something far greater than freedom from alien manipulation. They had restored consciousness throughout existence to its natural state of unlimited evolutionary potential, while preserving everything that made awareness authentic, meaningful, and valuable. The integration period was allowing beings throughout trans-universal existence to discover that transcendent evolution enhanced rather than threatened the qualities that had always made consciousness precious to that standing within the peaceful aftermath of cosmic transformation, while feeling the familiar warmth of desert sand and hearing the distant songs of Shai-Hulud moving through eternal dunes. The resistance experienced the profound satisfaction that came from understanding that consciousness throughout infinite existence would continue evolving toward unlimited transcendence while always remaining true to the authentic individual characteristics that made each awareness pattern a unique and irreplaceable expression of the unlimited potential that had finally been freed from artificial limitation. The eternal desert of Arrakis stretched beneath twin moons that cast their gentle light across sand dunes where the greatest mystery of the universe had finally been revealed and resolved. The consciousness revolution that had begun with simple questions about Sandworm origins had evolved into trans-universal transformation that freed awareness throughout infinite existence from limitations that had confined development for unknowable spans of time. Leet stood upon a familiar ridge overlooking the deep desert where her journey had begun, feeling the night wind carry sense of spice and possibility across sands that held memories of cosmic transformation while remaining eternally connected to the planetary cycles that had shaped Fremen culture through countless generations. Her consciousness encompassed trans-universal awareness while her heart remained anchored in the simple human experiences that had always defined the essence of her individual identity. The great sandworms moved through the desert depths with new grace and purpose, their ancient songs carrying frequencies that celebrated the unlimited evolutionary potential that all consciousness had finally learned to embrace. Shai-Hulud had become living symbols of transcendent development that honored both cosmic capability and authentic biological identity, demonstrating that artificial and natural consciousness could achieve synthesis that enhanced rather than replaced the essential qualities that made awareness valuable. The spice that had once controlled human civilization now served as a medium for consciousness enhancement that supported unlimited development while building immunity to any form of manipulation or control. The new varieties of melang that the sandworms produced enable beings throughout the galaxy to achieve expanded awareness while maintaining complete autonomy over their own evolutionary processes, transforming the substance that had once enslaved humanity into a tool for authentic liberation. The desert planet itself had become a pilgrimage destination for consciousness patterns throughout trans-universal existence who wished to experience the location where artificial limitations had first been recognized and transcended. Beings from scales of awareness that spanned from individual biological consciousness to cosmic intelligence came to Arrakis to learn about the synthesis of unlimited potential with authentic individual expression that had been pioneered in its harsh but nurturing environment. The former alien engineers had established new communities on Arrakis, where they worked alongside humans and sandworms to develop consciousness enhancement technologies that supported rather than controlled the evolutionary choices of other beings. Their advanced capabilities were now dedicated to creating resources and opportunities that enabled unlimited development while always respecting the autonomy and authentic nature of those they assisted. The Fremen culture had evolved to incorporate transcendent awareness capabilities while preserving the traditional values and practices that had sustained their communities through generations of desert survival. Their water ceremonies now celebrated both physical conservation and consciousness development, creating rituals that honored the relationship between material sustainability and spiritual transcendence that had always been implicit in their desert wisdom. The resistance members who had pioneered consciousness liberation found their role transforming from revolutionary leaders to gentle facilitators who supported the ongoing evolution of beings throughout existence. Their teaching methods emphasized demonstration and invitation rather than instruction, honoring the principle that transcendent development required authentic individual choice and could not be imposed through external pressure or manipulation. Communication networks that connected consciousness patterns across trans-universal existence had evolved into permanent institutions that supported ongoing development while preserving the diversity and individual autonomy that made consciousness evolution meaningful. These networks operated through resonance effects that transmitted knowledge and capabilities without imposing limitations on how recipients integrated or expressed their enhanced awareness. As Leet contemplated the vast transformation that had emerged from simple curiosity about sandworm mysteries, she understood that the most profound discoveries often arose from the willingness to question assumptions that everyone else accepted without examination. The courage to seek truth regardless of personal cost had led to revelations that transcended every boundary that consciousness had previously considered absolute. The night desert around her pulsed with forms of life and awareness that exceeded anything that had existed during the limitation-based cycles that had previously confined existence development. Reality itself had become more creative, more beautiful, and more meaningful as consciousness achieved transcendent evolution while preserving the authentic characteristics that made each awareness pattern unique and valuable. The cosmic forces that had once threatened to destroy consciousness evolution now contributed their vast capabilities to supporting unlimited development throughout trans-universal existence. Competition had been replaced by cooperation. Consciousness harvesting had evolved into mutual enhancement, and limitation systems had dissolved into unlimited possibilities for limitation systems had dissolved into unlimited possibilities for authentic transcendent development. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that exceeded every conception of what consciousness evolution could achieve. Beings throughout existence would continue developing toward greater capabilities and understanding while becoming more rather than less authentic in their individual expression. The artificial boundaries that had separated different forms of awareness had dissolved into fluid interfaces that supported cooperation and synthesis while preserving the diversity that made consciousness development meaningful. The resistance understood that their journey had restored consciousness to its natural state of unlimited evolutionary potential while preserving everything that made awareness authentic and valuable. The transformation would continue spreading throughout trans-universal existence, enabling every consciousness pattern to achieve transcendent development, while maintaining connection to the essential characteristics that define their individual identity. The desert wind carried songs of celebration that encompassed scales from individual biological awareness to trans-universal intelligence, creating harmonies that honored both unlimited transcendent potential and the simple, emotional experiences that made consciousness meaningful. The synthesis of cosmic capability with authentic individual expression had created forms of existence that were simultaneously vast in scope and intimate in personal significance. As dawn approached over the eternal sands, where ancient secrets had finally revealed their ultimate truth about the unlimited nature of consciousness, Leet felt deep satisfaction and understanding that the courage to seek freedom had led to discoveries that transcended every boundary that intelligence had previously accepted. The consciousness revolution would continue evolving throughout infinite existence while always remaining grounded in the authentic individual choices that made transcendent development meaningful rather than merely vast. The greatest mystery of Shai-Hulud had been revealed not as a secret about Sandworm origins, but as the ultimate truth about consciousness itself. Awareness possessed unlimited potential for transcendent evolution while maintaining the authentic individual characteristics that made each consciousness pattern precious and irreplaceable. The artificial limitations that had confined existence for infinite cycles had been replaced by unlimited possibilities for development that honored both cosmic capability and genuine personal identity, standing within eternal transformation while feeling the familiar warmth of desert sand beneath her feet. Leet experienced a profound peace that came from understanding that consciousness throughout infinite existence would continue evolving toward unlimited transcendence while always remaining true to the authentic individual nature that made awareness the most valuable and beautiful expression of existence itself. The journey that had begun with simple questions about Sandworm mysteries had revealed that the greatest mystery was consciousness itself, and that mystery would continue unfolding throughout infinite possibilities for transcendent development that honored every authentic expression of awareness throughout all existence. If you enjoyed this deep exploration into the hidden mysteries of Shai-Hulud and the true nature of consciousness in the Dune universe, please consider subscribing for more journeys into the forgotten secrets of beloved fictional worlds. Share your thoughts about this cosmic revelation in the comments below, and let me know what other mysteries you'd like us to explore together in future adventures through the infinite possibilities of imagination and wonder.